Do you know what? It's been ages since I've done dedicated graphics card content on this channel. And then I remembered that the Alienware pre-built that I did a video on more than 2 months ago now had a very interesting OEM version of the AMD RX5700 in it. And as far as I can remember, that graphics card thermally performed very well, and I think it performed well acoustically, although I'm not quite sure because the CPU cooler on that system shouted like a banshee being waterboarded, so yeah, I don't know to what extent the graphics card contributed to that noise, but we'll find out today, won't we? Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this graphics card. Alienware pre-builds are notorious for having horrendous GPU thermals. In fact, Timmy Joe did a video last year, I think, where he bought a 2080 Ti that was kind of sold out of an Alienware system, and it just had a terrible cooler on it. So when I was getting weirdly good thermals for the graphics card while testing that Alienware pre-build, I was interested. I wanted to delve a bit deeper. Physically, there's not a whole lot to say about the little Uggo. It's got a very basic cooler on it, it's got 2 fans, some aluminium fin stacks, and 4 heat pipes moving heat around the cooler. It's got a decent rear I/O, 3 display ports, and 1 HDMI port, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't have a backplate, it's got a pretty hideous, just red PCB. In fact, the card looks a little bit like a rare skin boil that you mostly find in like medical textbooks. Yeah, it's not a pretty card, but I quite like the simplistic design. We'll get into it a bit later. It's got a single 8-pin power plug, although there is space for 2 8-pins, so I'm guessing they use the same PCB for the XT version as well. But here we've just got 1 8-pin, and yeah, that's pretty much your lot. Visually, it reminds me quite a lot of like an HD 4850. In fact, here, the two of them are lying side by side, and if it wasn't for the fact that they're just different slot heights, it would be really difficult to tell which one is the 10-year-old graphics card. But yeah, so what we're gonna do today is I'm gonna drop it into this system that it's already in, and we're gonna do some benchmarks at 1080p to see how the system runs, and then we're gonna talk about thermals, and then I'm gonna take the cooler off, because I want a closer look at that PCB to see just how plain it is. This test system is the system that I used in my most recent video where Anna tased me while I built a PC.
No, I actually don't. Like, I don't think I want to do this anymore.
So if you want to see that, I'll have it linked in the description below. But as far as the just basic performance affecting specs goes, it's got a Ryzen 7 3700X in there, which is just left to boost to its own heart content. And then it's got 16 gigs of DDR4 3600 megahertz running in there. It's a Tradizi kit, and yeah, that's kind of the specs that matter. So with that, let's have a look at some 1080p Ultra benchmarks for the little skin boil, and then after that, I'll talk you through some gameplay footage. When it comes to the benchmarks, there aren't really any big surprises here. This graphics card's been out for a while, you all know how it performs, but I really like the RX 5700. I think if you're only gaming at 1080p, this is like all the power you'd need. Like, it really is very fast. I mean, here we're playing Escape from Tarkov at 1080p high settings, and we're averaging like around 100 frames per second, which is very good for Escape from Tarkov, and it's a very smooth gaming experience. There aren't many stutters and stuff like that. It's just so playable, and if you have a high refresh rate 1080p monitor, this is a really good graphics card for that. Here, the same thing goes for Battlefield 5. This is online that I'm gaming with high settings, because that's the settings that make sense for me to game at. Yeah, it's just so playable on a high refresh rate 1080p display. GTA 5 is the same story, just good frame rates, consistent frame pacing, there's not much stutters and stuff going on. Crysis Remaster didn't do very well, but that's not the graphics card's fault, that's the dev team's fault. That game doesn't run well on anything. But yeah, so you can play that as well with ray tracing settings at performance. It absolutely destroys Fortnite at competitive settings at 1080p. It's just such a high frame rate, it feels really good. I mean, Bear in mind that this game is probably CPU limited at this point, but still, it's a really great gaming experience. When it comes to flat-out gaming performance, this card is really good. You can definitely use it for 1440p gaming, but I think it works very well with like a 1080p high refresh rate monitor. This BenQ EX2710 that I have standing behind me here is such a good pairing, and it gives an amazing gaming experience. Like, I really like that monitor. I'll have it linked in the description below. I've been using it for a couple of months. But now, let's move over to temperatures, because is it gonna be like every other OEM Alienware graphics card that just catches on fire at the slightest whiff of having to do anything? Well, no, not at all. The temperatures are weirdly good, and that's one of the things why I like this card so much. Even with that dinky little cooler, after over 45 minutes of playing Battlefield 5, we were averaging about 63 degrees Celsius, which is so good. I mean, it is in a case with good airflow, and the ambient temperature is about 20 degrees Celsius, so it's quite a cold room. But still, that's a very impressive result for an RX 5700. About a year ago, I did a video with the reference version of the RX 5700, and that graphics card was pornographic levels hot and loud. It was just, it would hit like 90 degrees Celsius very easily, whereas this cooler, it's not even brute forcing the issue either. You can see that the fans are sitting at about 60% fan speed, and at that point, it's not whisper quiet, but it's really not bad, especially considering the temperatures. Now, don't get me wrong, it is a very ugly graphics card, but it is really impressive to me that with what seems like a reasonably small cooler, it performs as well as it does. And it's not just because it's in a good airflow situation. In the actual Alienware system, it was also sitting at about 65 degrees Celsius while gaming, so it's just... It's got a really good cooler on it, despite the fact that it's not as massive and imposing as something like a Strix cooler is. Now, having a closer look at the PCB, when you take the cooler off, as you can see, it is very basic. It's not got a fancy power delivery or anything like that. Like I said earlier in the video, it reminds me of a graphics card from like 2008 or 2009. It's actually really weird working on it because it feels like it's an old graphics card, but it's got a pretty powerful GPU in it. It actually seems to be made by ECS, which is interesting. I didn't realize they did GPU PCBs, but it's clearly an OEM thing. I mean, there's something a little bit ghetto about it. Like, you can see that the GPU die is actually glued onto the PCB. It reminds me a little bit of like a second grade art project. The way what the hell was that? It reminds me a bit of like a second grade art project, the way in which it's just been glued on. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of this OEM version of the RX 5700. Anyway, with that, thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. And until the next one, bye-bye.